The billionaire stared at the black CEO's outstretched hand, smirked, and said, "I only shake hands with the person who actually owns the money." The board erupted in laughter as if racism had suddenly become a corporate achievement. They saw a woman they could humiliate, not the woman holding their company's last lifeline. But when Amara calmly closed the contract and froze all $3 billion in funding, those smug faces began to collapse. Because arrogance is expensive, and theirs was about to cost thousands of jobs, expose a massive fraud, and destroy an empire. Where are you watching from? Stay until the end. This ending will not disappoint you. The laughter started before Amara Ellison lowered her hand. She stood at the head of the 72nd floor boardroom, in a red suit, one arm still extended toward Gideon Harrow. Manhattan stretched beyond the glass walls while a digital market clock counted down the final hour before closing. For 9 months, Arclight Dominion had pursued Ellison Crown Capital's $3 billion funding package. Gideon himself had called Amara repeatedly, warning that every delay threatened the company. Yet now he remained seated. He looked at her hand, adjusted his cuff, and smiled. "I shake hands with the person who owns the money," he said, "not the person sent in to perform." Preston Harrow laughed first. 3 directors followed. Julian Mercer lowered his eyes to his papers. Someone murmured that Gideon was still as sharp as ever. Amara held her hand there for one more second, long enough to make the insult impossible to dismiss, then calmly withdrew it. "Should we bring in another chair?" Gideon asked. "For whoever actually makes the decisions." Amara did not answer. She turned to Layla Morgan, the company's senior legal counsel. "Is the official recording active?" Layla hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. The entire meeting is being recorded." Amara placed her briefcase on the table. Everyone expected the final agreement. Instead, she removed a black-bordered notice and slid it forward. "Ellison Crown Capital is suspending all disbursement activity effective immediately." The laughter died. Gideon's face hardened. "No one leaves this floor until she explains herself." He accused Amara of using a minor social misunderstanding to demand more control. She met his stare. "This has nothing to do with your refusal to shake my hand." Her auditors had discovered an addendum inserted overnight. It authorized an immediate $240 million consulting payment to Silver Meridian Advisory once her capital cleared. Preston shrugged. "Standard intermediary fee." Amara turned toward him. "Then identify the beneficial owner." His smile disappeared. "That information is confidential, not when it is being paid from my money." Across the table, Owen Brooks began to sweat. He checked the market clock, his phone, then the door. Gideon claimed the board had approved the payment. Amara placed another document beside the first. The $3 billion was not ordinary expansion capital. It was the condition required for a banking consortium to extend Arclight Dominion's $4.8 billion debt facility. Without her signature before 4 o'clock, the lenders could declare a covenant breach and demand repayment. Several directors stared at Gideon in disbelief. They had not been told. Vivian Cho turned to Owen. "How long have you known?" He opened his mouth, but no answer came. His phone vibrated across the table. The screen displayed, "Cure period remaining 52 minutes." Gideon seized Amara's papers. "Sign first," he said. "We remove the fee afterward." He pushed a pen toward her. "You get your audit, 2 board seats. Whatever language you want." Amara picked up the pen, clicked it once, then closed it. "You are asking me to save this company by financing the behavior that is killing it." Gideon lowered his voice. "I am asking you to understand consequences." "I do." She stood, gathered her documents, and walked toward the private elevator. The call button did not respond. She pressed it again. A red lock symbol appeared above the doors. Layla looked toward the security panel. "Who restricted the floor?" Preston did not bother pretending. "Temporary access control," he said. "No one leaves until the board reaches a resolution." Behind Gideon, the clock changed from 52 minutes to 51. Amara faced the room again, not frightened, only calculating. She had arrived expecting to sign an investment agreement. Within minutes she understood the truth. Gideon Harrow was not trying to negotiate. He intended to keep her trapped 72 floors above Manhattan until she released $3 billion into a corrupt system or accepted the role of accomplice in its collapse. The red lock symbol above the elevator doors remained lit as Gideon Harrow rose slowly from his chair. The mocking smile was gone. In its place was the colder expression of a man who had spent decades confusing ownership with immunity. "Ellison Crown Capital has already committed to this transaction," he said. If you walk away now, we will sue you for every dollar Arclight Dominion loses. Amara remained near the locked elevator, her briefcase resting against her leg. Then I assume your legal counsel can identify the clause I violated. Gideon turned sharply toward Layla Morgan. She opened the agreement on her tablet and read in silence, while the market clock continued counting down. The capital commitment remains conditional, she finally said. Arclight must provide complete disclosure of all related party transactions and certify that no undisclosed intermediary will receive funds. Her eyes moved toward Preston. The Silver Meridian addendum violates both requirements. Gideon's voice hardened. That is enough, Layla. She closed neither the file nor her mouth. It is the contract. Gideon walked toward Amara and lowered his voice as though the rest of the board had suddenly ceased to exist. Sign today. Silver Meridian receives its fee. You get 2 board seats and $40 million personally when the deal closes. Amara looked toward the ceiling microphone. Layla, record Mr. Harrow's offer in the official minutes. Gideon immediately stepped back. I made no such offer. Then the recording will be very useful, Amara replied. Vivian Cho turned to Owen Brooks. How much cash do we actually have? Owen stared at the table. Enough for current operations. For how long? Vivian pressed. Gideon ordered her to stop, but she did not even look at him. Owen swallowed. Less than 9 days. The room erupted. Directors who had laughed minutes earlier began demanding answers. Owen admitted that if the banking consortium declared a covenant breach, Arclight might not have enough available cash to meet the next payroll. Julian Mercer removed his glasses, visibly shaken. Gideon pointed at Owen. He has exaggerated our position to help Ellison force a discounted takeover. Owen looked up for the first time. The numbers came from your office. Gideon's expression changed just enough to silence him. Preston moved quickly to regain control. He ordered security to collect every phone in the room, claiming an information leak could trigger market panic. 2 guards approached Amara. She held her phone at her side. You will not take my property. One guard extended his hand. Layla stepped between them. She is an invited investor, not an employee. Locking the floor and seizing her communications could constitute coercion and unlawful detention. Preston laughed. Careful, counselor. You still work here. That is precisely why you should listen. Amara checked the countdown on her screen. 47 minutes remained. You should also know this, she said. The transaction has a dead man protocol. Gideon's eyes narrowed. Amara explained that if she failed to authorize the investment before the deadline, a preliminary report on Silver Meridian would automatically be delivered to all 12 banks in the lending consortium. The report included the secret addendum, the payment schedule, and the undisclosed ownership questions. Gideon looked at Preston. For the first time, father and son appeared uncertain. They could keep Amara inside the room, but they could not force her to sign without exposing the transaction they were trying to conceal. Layla used the distraction to continue tracing Silver Meridian through international corporate records. 4 shell companies led from Delaware to Luxembourg, then to a private trust registered under the name of Preston's late mother. The beneficial controller is Preston Harrow, she said. The room fell silent again. Amara turned toward him. $240 million in consulting fees. Paid to you. Preston called the allegation absurd, but Layla kept reading. Silver Meridian had already received $710 million from Arclight over 4 years. It had no registered employees, no operating office, and no documented consulting work. Vivian demanded Preston's immediate suspension and an independent forensic audit. Gideon refused. My son is being targeted because a woman who entered this room with a grievance wants to prove she can control it. Amara's voice remained calm. No one has to control this room. The numbers are speaking for themselves. Gideon called for a vote to remove her. 5 loyal directors raised their hands. The elevator was unlocked and Preston gestured toward it with theatrical contempt. Your money is no longer welcome here. Amara stepped inside, turned, and pressed send on her phone. 30 floors below every screen in Arclight Dominion's financial command center flashed red. The banking consortium had suspended the company's $900 million revolving credit line. One warning filled the displays: default review process initiated. Gideon had just lost his last financial lifeline. But instead of admitting what he had done, he chose the weapon that had protected him for years. He would turn the woman who exposed the crime into the person the world blamed for the collapse. By the time Amara Ellison reached the marble lobby of Arclight Dominion, the story had already been written for her. Dozens of reporters crowded behind the security barriers, their phones raised. Television cameras pointed directly at the elevator doors. Before she could take 3 steps, questions struck from every direction. A video from the boardroom was playing across the financial news screens above them. It began only after Gideon Harrow had refused her handshake. His insult, Preston's laughter, and the board's contempt had all disappeared. The edited clip showed Amara announcing the suspension of $3 billion in funding, gathering her documents, and walking away while directors stared in shock. A headline crawled beneath it: Black CEO withdraws funding after board refuses to surrender control. Miss Ellison, are you destroying 22,000 jobs because your takeover attempt failed? One reporter shouted. Another forced his way closer. Were you offended because Mr. Harrow would not shake your hand? Are you being too sensitive? Amara stopped just long enough to face the cameras. Ask Arclight Dominion to release the full recording, she said. Then she continued toward the exit as the questions became louder. 60 floors above her, Preston Harrow was already standing behind a press podium. He accused Amara of exploiting racial tension to pressure a vulnerable company into surrendering control of its board. Gideon appeared beside him, calm and grandfatherly, presenting himself as the protector of employees trapped in the path of a personal financial attack. We will not allow one investor's wounded pride to determine the future of 22,000 families, he said. Neither man mentioned Silver Meridian, the secret consulting payment, or the $4.8 billion debt crisis they had concealed. Within an hour, the edited video spread across social media and every major financial network. 2 institutional investors contacted Ellison Crown Capital and threatened to freeze new commitments until Amara explained why she had abandoned the transaction. Her own partners demanded an emergency meeting. Gideon's attorneys moved just as quickly, filing a lawsuit that accused her of breaching a binding commitment and asking the court to freeze $600 million in preliminary funds. The humiliation had lasted seconds. The retaliation was designed to last years. Layla Morgan remained inside Arclight Dominion, searching the internal media logs before Preston could erase them. What she found made her blood run cold. The clip had not been edited after the meeting. A project file titled Ellison Walkout Final had been created on Preston's computer 18 minutes before Amara entered the boardroom. The editing timeline already contained designated start and stop points, leaving space for only one missing ingredient: Amara's reaction. Layla opened a linked communications memo. Its instructions were brief: trigger emotional response, allow subject to leave, frame withdrawal as retaliation. Gideon's refusal to shake Amara's hand had not been impulsive arrogance. It had been staged provocation. He wanted her angry enough to walk out, giving Arclight a public narrative and a legal excuse to seize her deposit. Even the laughter had been planned. Preston had sent selected directors a message before the meeting: follow the chairman's tone, keep the room light, make her feel isolated. Layla copied the logs, the editing timeline, and the memo onto an encrypted drive, then sent the files to Amara. Seconds later, her employee account went dark. The lights on her office phone disappeared, her email closed, and 2 security officers appeared at the door. Preston stood behind them. You have stolen confidential corporate property, he said. Layla rose slowly. No, I preserved evidence. He ordered security to escort her through the lobby, ensuring the waiting cameras captured every moment. Reporters shouted that Arclight's own lawyer had been caught stealing files for Amara. Layla said nothing. She reached her car and drove away, but a black SUV pulled from the curb behind her. It remained 2 vehicles back through 3 turns, then followed her down the ramp of a private underground garage. Layla sent one final message to Amara: do not stop at Silver Meridian. Find the Black Line files. Less than a minute later, her phone lost signal. The SUV entered the garage behind her and the security gate closed. Black Line would reveal that Gideon had stolen far more than money. Arclight Dominion had built prejudice into a formal system, one designed to decide who was allowed into the room and who would be rejected before they ever had the chance to speak. Layla Morgan escaped the black SUV by driving straight through a red light and into a crowded intersection where 2 traffic officers were already directing vehicles around a construction zone. The SUV slowed, then disappeared into another lane when the officers looked toward it. Within 20 minutes, Amara Ellison's security team had moved Layla into a protected apartment registered under a law firm that specialized in whistleblower cases. By midnight, the encrypted files she had copied were open inside Ellison Crown Capital's Forensic Analysis Center. At first, Blackline appeared to be an ordinary supplier risk platform. Its public description claimed it measured financial stability, delivery, history, security standards, and contract performance. But the hidden categories told a different story. Businesses were penalized for operating in neighborhoods with large black populations. Founders who had spoken publicly about discrimination were labeled potentially confrontational. Company names were marked as incompatible with client image. Vendors without connections to the Harrow family's social and political network were classified as relationship deficient. More than 83% of the companies rejected through Blackline were owned by Black, Latino, immigrant, or female entrepreneurs. Many had offered lower prices and stronger performance records than the companies selected in their place. The winners were often tied to Gideon Harrow's friends, former partners, and political donors. Amara did not treat the discovery as a statistical anomaly. She asked her team to trace the people behind the numbers. That search led her to Marcus Reed, ArcLight Dominion's former compliance director. Marcus had spent 3 years living under the shadow of a scandal that had destroyed his reputation. When Amara met him in the back office of the whistleblower law firm, he placed a worn notebook on the table before she could ask her first question. "I found Blackline 3 years ago," he said. He had demanded that the system be suspended and reported to the board. 2 weeks later, Preston accused him of harassing a junior employee. Fabricated emails appeared in the press, and Marcus was dismissed before he could defend himself. Gideon then offered him a choice: sign a non-disclosure agreement or lose the retirement benefits that paid for his wife's medical care. Marcus signed, but he kept handwritten records. His notebook contained the names of 37 rejected businesses and 14 employees who had raised concerns before being terminated, transferred, or publicly discredited. Gideon called Amara before the forensic team finished scanning the final pages. His tone was controlled, almost generous. He offered to apologize publicly for what he called the misunderstanding over the handshake. ArcLight would pay Ellison Crown Capital $75 million to end the transaction, withdraw its lawsuit, and give Amara an honorary board seat. In exchange, she would delete the Blackline files, return all Silver Meridian data, and sign a permanent confidentiality agreement. "You can leave this with your reputation intact," Gideon said. Amara looked through the apartment window at the city below. "You are offering me a seat in exchange for protecting the system that kept others outside the room." She refused. Gideon's politeness vanished. He warned that 22,000 employees would lose their jobs if she continued. Their faces, he promised, would appear across every news network beneath the words, "Victims of Amara Ellison's decision." Amara answered, "They are not your shield, Gideon. They are the people you placed in danger." At ArcLight, Vivian Cho discovered that several Blackline approvals carried her electronic signature. She had never seen the documents. A digital review showed her authorization credentials had been copied and used without her knowledge. Gideon had prepared to blame the entire discriminatory system on her if regulators ever found it. Owen Brooks uncovered something equally dangerous. Financial records were being altered to make him appear solely responsible for every Silver Meridian payment. Gideon had not merely hidden his crimes, he had built separate escape routes, each requiring the destruction of someone who had once protected him. Owen called Amara from a service corridor near ArcLight's finance center. His voice was barely above a whisper. "There is an offline archive in the basement. It contains the original transfers, the signature change logs, and the unedited Blackline database. Preston had ordered the archive erased before midnight. Owen said he could reach it, but he would need help getting the data out." Amara asked how much time remained. Before he could answer, another voice entered the call from directly behind him. "Who are you talking to, Owen?" It was Preston. The line went dead. The only complete evidence against the Harrow family was still buried beneath ArcLight Dominion. To preserve it, Amara would have to get Owen out before midnight, but Gideon had transformed the building into a sealed trap, and every door inside it answered to his son. At 11 o'clock that night, ArcLight Dominion's headquarters looked almost empty, but the building was still watching everyone inside it. Owen Brooks had bought himself less than an hour by pretending to accept Preston Harrow's offer, remain loyal, help, blame the missing money on Amara Ellison, and keep his family protected. Preston believed fear had finally made the CFO obedient. It had not. While Owen descended toward the basement under the excuse of performing an emergency equipment inventory, Layla Morgan entered through the freight delivery corridor, using access credentials she had copied before her termination. Across Manhattan, Amara sat with an independent attorney trying to obtain an emergency preservation order that would legally prevent ArcLight from destroying its records. The judge's clerk warned that the order might not be reviewed before midnight. By then, the offline archive would be gone. Amara opened the internal camera feed Layla had preserved and watched Owen approach a reinforced storage room beneath the data center. He entered an old authorization sequence, waited through 3 silent seconds, and opened the steel safe. Inside were 3 hard drives and several thick folders stamped with black-line identification codes. "We found it," Layla whispered through her earpiece. She connected a portable cloning device to the first drive. The progress bar reached 6%. Then every light in the basement went dark. The fire alarm began 1 second later. Smoke pushed through the ventilation grills from the adjoining server room, thick and black enough to erase the far wall. The automatic sprinkler system did not activate. Instead, the fire doors slammed shut, sealing Owen and Layla inside the archive section. Preston's voice came through the ceiling, speakers calm and almost amused. "You are trespassing in a restricted facility. Police are already on their way. Any files removed from this room will be treated as stolen corporate property." Layla reached the emergency control panel, but the release command had been disabled remotely from Preston's operations console. Owen grabbed a fire extinguisher and smashed the glass covering a maintenance passage. Before he could climb through, a metal shelving unit collapsed, pinning his shoulder against the floor. Layla had the clone drive in her hand and an open escape route less than 10 feet away. She could leave with the evidence or go back for Owen. The fire moved closer. She went back. Using a broken steel bracket as leverage, she lifted the shelving just enough for Owen to drag himself free. Together they crawled through the narrow maintenance duct as flames entered the archive room behind them. They dropped into the underground parking level seconds before the storage ceiling collapsed. Police cars were already waiting. So were television cameras. Preston had prepared both. Officers ordered Layla to the ground while Owen was placed on a stretcher. A container of accelerant was discovered in the trunk of Layla's car, though she had never seen it before. Preston told police that the two had broken into the basement, started the fire, and attempted to steal financial records on Amara's orders. Layla was handcuffed beneath the flashing lights as reporters shouted questions about corporate sabotage. An officer seized the evidence bag containing the hard drives before Owen was loaded into the ambulance. Gideon Harrow arrived in time to stand before the cameras and deliver the story exactly as planned. Amara Ellison, he claimed, had hired disgruntled insiders to destroy ArcLight Dominion after her hostile takeover failed. Minutes later, Preston released security logs showing that the fire suppression system had been disabled using access credentials assigned to Amara. The evidence looked devastating until Layla remembered that Amara had never been issued an ArcLight access card. A digital account had been created in her name 3 days before the board meeting. The sabotage had been prepared before she ever entered the building. Preston had overlooked one detail. The drive confiscated by police was a decoy. Before her arrest, Layla had slipped the real drive into the protective coat of a firefighter who had recognized that the suppression system had been deliberately shut down. He quietly delivered it to Amara's attorney. The recovered data showed that Preston had disabled the sprinklers from his phone. It also revealed something worse than the staged fire. The $710 million routed through Silver Meridian had not come only from operating accounts. Hundreds of millions had been taken directly from employee pension reserves. Then the forensic team opened a file titled Emergency Funding Replacement Midnight Transfer. Gideon had arranged a replacement investor to deliver $3 billion before morning, allowing him to appear before shareholders as the man who had saved the company. But the new capital was built from money already stolen from ArcLight's employees. Unless Amara exposed the transfer before midnight, Gideon would rescue his empire with their retirement funds and force thousands of workers to pay for his survival twice. By morning, Gideon Harrow had transformed ArcLight Dominion's emergency shareholder meeting into a nationally televised trial of Amara Ellison. Outside the headquarters, employees, investors, and reporters crowded behind barricades, demanding answers about missing pension money and an approaching payroll crisis. Inside the auditorium, Gideon stood beneath a giant screen, displaying the evidence he had carefully arranged: the edited boardroom video, footage of Layla Morgan being handcuffed, flames spreading through the basement, and falsified security logs showing that Amara's access credentials had disabled the fire suppression system. ArcLight Dominion is under attack, Gideon declared. This was never an investment. It was a hostile takeover disguised as concern. The audience murmured as he accused Amara of creating a financial emergency, planting insiders in the company, and endangering 22,000 jobs. He allowed her only 3 minutes to respond. Amara walked onto the stage without notes. She did not defend her reputation or argue about the headlines. She looked toward the control booth and said, "Play the complete recording from the first board meeting." Preston immediately rose from his seat. The original file was destroyed in the fire. Amara gave a small signal to her legal team. A backup copy from the automated meeting record system appeared on the screen. Gideon's voice filled the auditorium. His refusal to shake her hand, his demand to meet the person who really owned the money, and his private offer of $40 million if she signed the agreement. Then Preston's voice followed, instructing staff to prepare the edited video before Amara withdrew the funding. The auditorium erupted. Gideon shouted that the recording had been created with artificial intelligence and demanded that regulators arrest Amara for distributing fabricated evidence. Vivian Cho stood before security could move. She removed a small recording device from her bag and revealed that she had carried it into the meeting because she suspected Gideon had been altering official records. Her independent audio matched Amara's copy exactly. Several directors began calling for Gideon's resignation. Julian Mercer moved away from him, and even some of Gideon's longtime supporters refused to meet his eyes. For the first time, the billionaire appeared to be losing control of the room. Then Preston called Owen Brooks to the stage. Owen's injured shoulder was strapped beneath his suit. He avoided Amara's gaze as he read from a prepared statement. He claimed she had promised him $15 million to steal financial data, destroy ArcLight's credit position, and help Ellison Crown Capital purchase the company at a reduced price. A contract bearing Amara's signature appeared behind him. Owen then stated that Layla had entered the basement and started the fire under Amara's direct instructions. The reaction was immediate. News anchors who had just questioned Gideon began describing Amara as the possible architect of a corporate sabotage scheme. Regulators whispered among themselves. Shareholders shouted for her arrest. Amara studied Owen instead of the contract. His hands were trembling. He touched his wedding ring 3 times, paused, then repeated the movement. He would not look toward the front row where Preston sat with a satisfied expression. Amara understood that Owen was not betraying her voluntarily. He was signaling that someone else was controlling his words. Renee Carter, the representative of ArcLight's workers, rose from the audience. "I do not care which billionaire wins this war," she said. "I need to know whether my people will be paid on Friday." Amara could not promise that. The credit line remained frozen, the replacement funding was fraudulent, and her own board had not authorized the release of new capital. Gideon seized the silence. "There it is," he told the cameras. "She has evidence, accusations, and speeches, but no concern for the employees she is destroying." Vivian interrupted him again. 3 weeks earlier, she revealed she had contacted federal investigator Sofia Reyes. Her private recorder had captured more than the handshake meeting. It also contained a conversation in which Gideon and Preston discussed using employee pension assets to create the replacement funding package. However, the most complete recording remained on a protected ArcLight server that Preston was preparing to erase. After the meeting, Amara received a live video from an unknown number. Owen's wife and son were sitting inside a hotel room with 2 of Gideon's security men standing behind them. A message appeared beneath the image. "If Owen withdraws his statement, his family will be held responsible for every missing dollar." To destroy the false testimony, Amara would have to do more than prove her signature had been forged. She had to rescue Owen's family before Gideon turned their silence into a conviction against her and a death sentence for the company. The video of Owen Brooks's family contained only 12 visible seconds, but Amara Ellison's forensic team treated every frame as evidence. A brass lamp reflected the edge of a silver emblem. The carpet carried a geometric pattern used by only one luxury hotel group in Manhattan. A room service menu appeared briefly on the desk, its corner marked with the initials SMH. Within 20 minutes, Layla Morgan identified the location as the Meridian Crest Hotel, a property controlled through one of Silver Meridian's shell companies. Federal investigator Sofia Reyes listened carefully, but the video alone was not enough to justify an immediate raid. There was no clear proof that Owen's wife and son were being held against their will. Preston's lawyers could claim they were guests receiving private protection. Layla searched employment records while Marcus Reed contacted a former ArcLight security supervisor who had been dismissed after refusing to erase incident reports. The man confirmed that Preston frequently reserved the hotel's entire 26th floor for what internal documents called protected witness management. He also provided Sophia with a floor plan showing a private elevator, blocked emergency exits, and a security office connected directly to Preston's phone. That was enough for Sophia to request an emergency search warrant. While federal agents prepared to move, Gideon Harrow appeared on live television with what looked like a miracle. Standing beneath the ArcLight Dominion logo, he announced that North Star Sovereign Holdings, an overseas investment fund, had agreed to provide $3 billion in replacement financing. Gideon smiled as if he had personally rescued every employee in the company. He promised payroll would be protected, pensions would remain intact, and ArcLight no longer needed the conditions, threats, or political theater of Amara Ellison. Financial commentators immediately praised his recovery. ArcLight's collapsing stock began to stabilize. The transfer was scheduled to close at midnight. If it succeeded, Gideon could repay enough short-term debt to silence nervous lenders, then use the appearance of stability to dismiss every accusation against him as a failed takeover strategy. Renee Carter watched the broadcast from the Workers' Command Center and called Amara. "My people are hearing that he found the money," she said. "If you say it is fake, prove it before they wake up believing he saved them." At 11:06 p.m., Sophia's team entered the Meridian Crest Hotel through the service level. Federal agents disabled the private elevator and forced open the security doors on the 26th floor. Owen's wife and teenage son were found in a locked suite guarded by 2 ArcLight contractors. Neither had access to a phone. On the table were prepared legal statements requiring Owen's wife to declare that her husband had independently stolen company funds and manipulated Amara into supporting him. Another document transferred responsibility for the missing pension assets to Owen if he ever withdrew his public testimony. When Sophia told Owen his family was safe, his silence ended. He formally retracted every accusation against Amara. He surrendered his phone, which contained Preston's threats, photographs of his family inside the hotel, and an audio recording of Preston forcing him to rehearse the false statement line by line before the shareholder meeting. But the rescue did not solve the larger crisis. Amara's forensic team had been tracing North Star Sovereign Holdings while the raid unfolded. The fund had no independent investors, no operational staff, and no legitimate capital history. It was a network of shell companies controlled indirectly by Gideon. The supposed $3 billion had been assembled from employee pension reserves, unpaid supplier invoices, inflated collateral, money previously routed through Silver Meridian, and a loan approved using falsified financial reports. Gideon's plan was brutally simple. Use stolen assets to create the appearance of new funding, move the company's toxic debt into a subsidiary, then allow that subsidiary to collapse. ArcLight's employees would lose their retirement savings first and their jobs immediately afterward, while Gideon claimed he had done everything possible to save them. Sophia contacted the banking consortium with 8 minutes remaining before the midnight transfer. The transaction was frozen. North Star's $3 billion disappeared before reaching ArcLight. The fraud had been stopped, but so had the company's last source of cash. ArcLight now had no confirmed money for Friday's payroll. Renee faced the cameras and condemned Gideon for stealing from workers, but she did not spare Amara. "Evidence does not pay rent," she said. "Arrests do not restore a pension by Friday. We need a real plan." Minutes later, Ellison Crown Capital's board held an emergency vote. Most directors ordered Amara to withdraw completely from ArcLight Dominion and protect the fund from further exposure. Legally, she had won. Financially, walking away was the safest decision. But if she obeyed, 22,000 employees could lose their jobs within days. For the first time, Amara faced a problem no document could solve. She could let ArcLight collapse and ensure Gideon was punished, or risk $3 billion to save the very people he had spent weeks using as human shields. The public hearing began under the glare of national television cameras, with thousands of ArcLight Dominion employees gathered outside the financial regulator's headquarters, demanding wages, pensions, and the truth. Amara Ellison did not begin with the handshake Gideon Harrow had refused. She began with the system that made the insult possible. One by one, she laid out the evidence. Silver Meridian had drained hundreds of millions from ArcLight through false consulting payments. Blackline had excluded minority, owned businesses under coded language disguised as risk analysis, Preston had prepared the edited boardroom video before she arrived. Electronic signatures belonging to directors had been forged. The basement fire had been staged. Owen Brooks had been forced to give false testimony. Employee pension money had been used to construct a fraudulent $3 billion rescue package, and Owen's family had been confined in a hotel room to guarantee his silence. Each fact appeared on the screens behind her with dates, transaction records, audio files, and internal communications. The hearing room grew quieter with every document. Marcus Reed testified next. He described how his career had been destroyed after he tried to stop Blackline 3 years earlier. Then the business owners who had been rejected by the system came forward. A black woman named Denise Carter explained that her engineering company had submitted a bid 30% lower than the winning contractor and had a stronger safety record. ArcLight rejected her proposal as incompatible with client expectations. The contract was later awarded to a company owned by one of Preston's former college friends. A former ArcLight engineer then revealed that Blackline had expanded beyond suppliers. The same scoring model had been quietly adapted for recruitment, reducing the scores of applicants from zip codes with large black and immigrant populations. Candidates never saw the penalty. Hiring managers were told the system was neutral. Preston understood that the evidence could no longer be contained. He turned on his father before Gideon could sacrifice him. Speaking into the microphone, Preston claimed every major decision had been ordered by Gideon. He said he had managed Silver Meridian, manipulated the media, and supervised the destruction of records, only because his father threatened to remove him from the family trust and inheritance. Gideon immediately accused Preston of acting alone. He called his son weak, greedy, and unstable, insisting that Silver Meridian had been Preston's private scheme. The two men began blaming each other in front of millions of viewers. Years of carefully maintained unity collapsed into open hatred. Julian Mercer rose next. He admitted signing false financial statements, but said Gideon had threatened to ruin his career and blame him for the company's debt if he refused. Gideon called him a coward. Julian answered, "I was a coward. That does not make you innocent." Vivian Cho then produced the evidence that finally destroyed Gideon's remaining control. She displayed 3 separate sets of internal files prepared months earlier. The first blamed Owen for the missing money. The second placed responsibility for Blackline on Vivian. The third identified Preston as the sole architect of the fraud if federal investigators became involved. Gideon had not protected a single person who had served him. He had prepared to sacrifice all of them. The directors were summoned into an emergency board session at ArcLight's headquarters. Outside employees watched the vote on giant screens. Inside, the result came quickly. Gideon was removed as chairman. Preston was suspended from all corporate duties. Julian resigned as chief executive. Vivian became interim chairwoman. Blackline was shut down immediately, and all financial employment and supplier records were transferred to an independent server beyond the Harrow family's control. In less than 10 minutes, Gideon lost command of the empire he had ruled for decades. Security escorted him toward the door. When he reached Amara, he stopped and extended the hand he had once refused to offer. "Save the company," he said quietly. "I will give you everything you want." Amara looked at his hand but did not take it. "I do not need you to give me power," she replied. "Your board just took it away from you." Gideon had fallen, but ArcLight Dominion remained only days from bankruptcy. Now the world would learn whether Amara had fought for justice or merely waited until the empire was weak enough to buy at a discount. Inside ArcLight Dominion's emergency restructuring room, 3 possible futures were displayed on the wall. The first allowed Ellison Crown Capital to withdraw completely and leave ArcLight to file for bankruptcy within days. The second allowed Amara Ellison's fund to purchase the company's most valuable assets after the collapse for a fraction of their current value. The third required Ellison Crown to restore the full $3 billion investment under a new governance structure, accepting enormous financial risk to protect the company's workers. Outside the building, thousands of employees waited behind barricades for news about their salaries, pensions, and jobs. Inside, several of Amara's investment partners argued for bankruptcy. It was legal, profitable, and clean. They could let Gideon Harrow's empire fall, acquire the technology and infrastructure at a discount, and leave the liabilities behind. Amara listened without interruption. Then she closed the bankruptcy proposal. Her father had spent 32 years working for a manufacturing corporation that deliberately moved its debt into a subsidiary and allowed it to collapse. He lost his pension 6 months before retirement, while the executives responsible received bonuses. Amara had built Ellison Crown Capital because she understood that bankruptcy could be used as a weapon, not merely a consequence. She would not allow 22,000 employees to become collateral damage in her victory over Gideon. Amara presented a new restructuring package. Ellison Crown Capital would restore the entire $3 billion, but not a cent would enter ArcLight without independent control. $1.1 billion would stabilize operations and guarantee payroll. $650 million would restore the pension fund. $400 million would pay small suppliers whose invoices Gideon had withheld. $300 million would compensate businesses excluded through Blackline. $250 million would rebuild the company's cybersecurity and evidence preservation systems. $200 million would establish an independent whistleblower protection fund, and the remaining $100 million would finance retraining and job transitions for divisions that could not survive restructuring. The Harrow family would lose its special voting rights. Personal assets connected to Silver Meridian would be seized to reimburse the pension fund. No member of the former board would receive a bonus during the restructuring period. Most importantly, employees would receive 2 permanent seats on the new board. The bank representatives began reviewing the terms. Vivian Cho supported them immediately. Owen Brooks and Layla Morgan confirmed that the controls were strong enough to prevent hidden transfers. Renee Carter demanded written payroll guarantees and direct worker access to financial reports. Amara added both conditions without argument. The doors opened before the final vote. Gideon entered as ArcLight's largest individual shareholder, accompanied by attorneys and cameras. He threatened to block the agreement in court, claiming the Harrow name was the only thing keeping customers, lenders, and political partners loyal to the company. "Remove me," he warned, "and this institution loses the identity that made it valuable." Amara faced him across the table. "This company did not nearly die because it lacked your name. It nearly died because you believed your name was worth more than the truth." Gideon insisted that clients would leave if he lost control. Renee stood before he could continue. "The employees do not need a king," she said. "They need wages, pensions, and a workplace that does not use their families as hostages." The union voted in favor. The banks followed. Then the ArcLight board and Ellison Crown Capital approved the restructuring package. Amara signed last. Gideon moved toward her as cameras gathered around the table. He extended his hand again, hoping one carefully framed photograph would make the agreement look like reconciliation rather than defeat. Amara walked past him. She shook Renee's hand first, then Owen's, Layla's, Marcus Reed's, and finally, the hand of a black woman named Gloria Hayes, who had cleaned ArcLight's executive floors for 24 years without ever being invited into the boardroom. Amara turned toward the employees watching outside. "This $3 billion is not being used to save a billionaire's reputation," she said. "It is being used to save the people who were forced to pay for that reputation." The agreement had barely been completed when federal investigator Sophia Reyes entered with an arrest warrant for Preston Harrow on charges of fraud, witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. At the same moment, Gideon received notice that his personal assets connected to Silver Meridian had been frozen. Security approached to escort him from the room. Before leaving, he looked at Amara and spoke quietly enough that only those nearest could hear. "You can change who sits in the chair," he said. "You cannot change how power works." 6 months later, Amara would return to the room that had once laughed at her, not to prove Gideon wrong, but to prove that power could be rebuilt without forcing anyone else to bow. 6 months later, the long table on the 72nd floor of ArcLight Dominion was still the same, but almost everything around it had changed. The company had survived bankruptcy, most of its 22,000 employees had kept their jobs, and the retirement accounts Gideon Harrow had treated like private property were being restored under independent supervision. Blackline had been permanently deleted, and every supplier rejected during the previous 8 years was being reviewed again under a transparent bidding process. Board meetings were now recorded on external servers that no executive could edit or erase. Related party transactions had to be disclosed. Before approval, family members were barred from voting on deals involving one another, and workers held permanent seats at the table. Whistleblowers received independent legal counsel instead of threats. Pension assets could no longer be pledged as collateral. Every hiring and supplier selection algorithm underwent regular bias audits, while complaints were transmitted simultaneously to an outside regulator. Executive bonuses were tied not only to stock performance, but also to workplace safety, ethical compliance, employee retention, and the protection of pension funds. Power had not disappeared from ArcLight. It had been forced to leave fingerprints. The people who had helped expose the old system now carried the responsibility of building the new one. Vivian Cho served as interim chairwoman but had voluntarily limited her term, refusing to let another personality become more important than the institution. Renee Carter became one of the first 2 employee representatives on the board. Marcus Reed led the review of contracts denied through Blackline, and personally contacted owners whose companies had been dismissed without fair consideration. Layla Morgan became Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer, with authority to report directly to regulators when management refused to act. Owen Brooks remained Chief Financial Officer under independent monitoring. At his first public meeting, he admitted that fear had made him silent long before threats forced him to lie. His family was safe, but he refused to describe himself as a victim without also acknowledging the people harmed during the years he had looked away. Julian Mercer cooperated with investigators, but was barred from serving in a senior executive position for years. Preston Harrow faced charges involving fraud witness, intimidation, forged evidence, and obstruction of justice. Gideon lost his board seat, his special voting rights, and most of the assets connected to Silver Meridian, while civil and criminal investigations continued. When Amara Ellison entered the boardroom, she paused near the doorway. 6 months earlier, Gideon had remained seated while she extended her hand, and the people around him had laughed, because they believed humiliation was harmless when power approved it. This time, every person in the room stood. There were no rehearsed smiles, no secret cameras, and no edited video waiting to turn the moment into a weapon. Vivian walked forward and extended her hand. Amara accepted it. The gesture lasted only a second, but no one laughed. Amara looked around the room. "Respect does not begin when a powerful person finally agrees to shake your hand," she said. "It begins when power is no longer allowed to decide who deserves to be in the room." The doors opened behind her. Waiting in the hallway was a group of business owners once rejected by Blackline. They had returned to sign contracts awarded through the new independent process. Among them was Denise Carter, the older black woman, whose engineering company had been rejected 7 times despite meeting every technical, financial, and safety requirement. She entered cautiously, as though expecting someone to stop her. No one did. Amara did not move toward the chair at the head of the table. Instead, she pulled several empty chairs away from the wall and placed them beside the board members. "This room does not need more people waiting outside the door," she said. One by one, the business owners entered and took their places. The table that had once been used to isolate Amara now became the place where those previously excluded were finally heard. Gideon had believed refusing a handshake would remind her of her position. He never understood that her power did not depend on his recognition. Amara had not withdrawn $3 billion to avenge an insult. She had withdrawn it to prevent her capital from feeding corruption, discrimination, and the exploitation of workers. And when she restored the funding, she did not save Gideon's empire. She saved the people that empire had considered expendable. Gideon believed power meant deciding whose hand was worthy of his, and whose future could be sacrificed to protect his name. But Amara proved that real power is not humiliation, control, or revenge. It is having the courage to stop a corrupt system, protect thousands of workers, and open the door for those deliberately kept outside. She did not use $3 billion to save a billionaire's empire. She used it to rebuild the lives his arrogance nearly destroyed. What would you have done in Amara's position? Walked away, or risked everything to save the employees? If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories where truth finally forces power to answer.